So you really should not ride in the winter, unless you want to. But riding in the winter is not very safe, unless you do it in a safe way. The other thing about riding in the winter is it's extremely beautiful, but it's often just cold and grimy and gray. In this video, we're going to break down what riding in the winter really is and what winter actually means. These are the things that were running through my head on the ride today. So I didn't used to actually ride very much in the winter. And what is winter? In Northeast Ohio, we kind of consider it anything after Thanksgiving till around St. Patrick's Day. Our weather is so variable, you really don't know what you're going to get. This year, fall was really mild, December was really mild, and now we've gotten hit since January with 3 big winter storms. So there's been snow on the ground since the new year. So yeah, I would only go out if the roads were kind of clear, the trails were kind of clear, and say it wasn't below the mid-20s. That's what I, at the time, found to be too cold, was low 20s into the teens. So that's different for everybody, obviously. That's one of the things about where I live is winter can really be anything. You know, it could be 2 feet of snow covering everything, and it could be 40 degrees and rain, and then we could have the freak 50 degrees where I'm just going out like it's a normal road ride. The thing that happened is I went out to, we had planned like a camping trip, and it was in the winter, and it had snowed a decent amount, a few inches. I took my old mountain bike. I'd gotten used to like kind of what I needed to wear for what the temperature was, which was high 20s, low 30s, depending on the time of day. Got to downtown Akron with some of the crew. We met the rest of the crew. I couldn't keep the bike upright. I realized that I was not going to get down the bike path we were trying to ride, and I just had to call it. I had a beer in a bar, felt all frustrated and upset, turned around and went home and had a 6-mile ride instead of an overnight, almost 100-mile ride. So I kind of was like then, you know, I'm done with winter riding. You know, I'll ride if it's cold and if it's dry, but I'm not even bothering with this snow stuff and all of that. The more I rode with my friends and we had our weekly group ride, it just hit me that I couldn't give up on it. Otis at Dirty River Bicycle Works convinced me to get some snow tires. So I got some steel-studded Gravdale, 45 North Gravdales, 2-inch tires, and they changed everything. We went out in a couple inches of snow and rode the towpath, and I was having a great time. And I realized this is something that I can do, and this is something that I want to do. And there have been winter rides where we're riding down our towpath at night. You don't need your headlights on because the moon is out and just a white path, and there's a few inches of snow on the ground. You're cutting through the snow. It's quiet. It's peaceful. No one else is out. You get used to the idea that it's all your own. And everything about winter riding in those moments seems great. But even on some of those rides, we would end up stopping in a bar, having some dinner, having a drink. The temperature would plunge, and then it was like just painful to get back outside. You had a full stomach, you had warmed up. Those first couple miles would be absolutely brutal. You realize you had ridden 10 miles, which in the summer or spring would have been nothing, and all of a sudden you're working so much harder on the way back because of the cold, because you're pushing through the snow, because you're not riding the bike you normally want to ride, which depending on what you ride in the winter, it could be a fat bike or, you know, for me, my old mountain bike, all that kind of stuff. And for a little while, you're miserable and you're questioning again why you do it. And then and this year, with us not being able to ride the trails because we've gotten so much snow at once, I'm out on the roads. There's no shoulder. They don't plow the shoulders. They don't plow the bike lane. They don't plow the sidewalks. So you're riding out in the street. Drivers aren't expecting to see you. They're already frustrated because they can't get where they're going as fast as they want. It's getting dark at 4 or 5 o'clock, depending on the time of year. You have extra lights. You're like, why am I doing this? It took you so long to get ready. It takes you years kind of to workshop the clothing situation. Here with our changing weather, I wear different amounts of clothes in the same temperature depending on how acclimated I've become to the climate. All these things can make winter riding just not fun. And I definitely understand why some people are just like, I'm not going to do it. So say you decide that it is something you want to do. How do you go about it? How do you start? First is starting getting used to the gear, and that's the clothing. Something, a windbreaker, you definitely need a layer that is really going to protect you from the wind. If you plan to stop outside, packable down jackets are almost indispensable. Wool layers, wool is number one. You need stuff that will still insulate if it gets wet and a little sweaty. My goal is always to try and not get sweaty, especially if it's a ride where we're going to stop. Then the actual bike stuff. It's an investment. There's no two ways around it that winter riding costs money. It costs time and it costs money. But if you're dedicated, for me, I was able to take my own old mountain bike. I've now put more money into it with the Surly corner bars and the Happy Stem and a new drivetrain mostly over the years. But really when it comes down to it, the snow tires are enough to get me by most things. If you're really dedicated or you live somewhere where the snow is on the ground all year and they actually maybe even groom trails and maybe even plow your trails and through the city and like that, a fat bike would probably be the worthwhile investment. I definitely understand why people do it. It's so hard for me to make the jump around here because like last winter, I might have jumped on that thing twice. And this winter, I probably would have been riding it every day in January. Safety, where do you live? Do you have somewhere to ride in the winter? Like I said, this winter, I just went out for 14 miles and I'm consciously thinking of every turn I'm going to make. How am I going to get where I'm trying to get? We've had this crazy kind of snow, and there's all different kinds of snow, as you'll learn, though where we've gotten too much, so it's impossible to ride in places. Then if it doesn't get plowed fast enough and just cars go through it, the car tracks are almost impossible to ride on, and I will say no matter what you're riding. I rode Otis's fat bike with fat studded tires, which is a monster truck and can go over almost anything, but we've had these tire tracks this year where the snow is slipping on the snow. It's not about your bike or tires, and it's almost hard to keep anything upright. I've watched Lucas Burnell videos where he's riding around Boston on 28 millimeter tires or whatever insane thing on his Chinelli, but he's riding through this thick slush and snow and he's keeping it upright. It's always different. It takes effort. It takes thinking about it, So you're workshopping your clothes, you're workshopping the gear, you're thinking about what street you're going to ride down. It's something that is always going to take a little bit of effort, and it has to be something you want to do. Like I said, though, other winters have been perfect around here. When I started getting into cycling, GCN was the only YouTube I watched, and they would talk about winter riding, and I felt like this has no relevance to me. The weather they were talking about sometimes did, they're talking 30s, 40s, and rain. We get a lot of that in certain winters, you never know. But I was never somebody who wanted to go out in a bunch of road gear on a roadie bike, $5,000 to $10,000 roadie bike in GCN's case, and I'm trying to blast through the miles and get a workout in. That's not who I am or what I'm trying to do. So that became like completely irrelevant to me, and I'm like, there has to be other ways. I do believe that most people can learn to dress for the cold. If you think about it, if you have somewhere there's snow and you go out to shovel your driveway, you get yourself super bundled up, and within 10 minutes, right, you're unzipping that winter jacket, you're maybe shedding some layers, you realize you're completely overdressed. Cycling's the same way. Especially if you're cycling in the snow, you're going to start to work really hard and realize, I don't actually need to be dressed that warm to be out here. I'm not saying that works for everybody, but it works for a lot of people. Just the actual effort, and it's getting through that first couple miles a lot of time. That's what I find when it's below the mid-20s for me. That threshold will be different depending on what you're used to. But by midwinter, it gets below the mid-20s. I just have to push through a couple miles that aren't very comfortable. My forehead will hurt, my face will hurt a little bit. I have to wear clear glasses, if it's not sunny, if I'm riding at night, to keep the wind out of my eyes. But it is stuff that once you start to get the hang of, it's not so bad, because once you get moving, you're going to be plenty warm. I actually go out to be cold. I know I'm going to struggle through that first 2 miles, so I don't end up a hot, sweaty mess 4 or 5 miles down the road. Should you ride in the winter? It's totally up to you. As I think there are huge benefits. A couple weeks ago, before the snow, it was really cold, but we rode and had a stealth burn, and we were standing outside drinking a beer with a fire going, and it was kind of amazing, and I was really loving it. And, turning around and jumping on the bike, yes, again, like I said, it was a little painful to get moving. Then once we got moving, it was just great, and the city was all ours and stuff like that. At the same time, you do, depending on where you live, have to worry about cars, people not looking out for you. You have to just be a little more cautious and stuff like that. It just depends. And every winter, at least in Northeast Ohio, is different. So my 14 miles today was not the most fun 14 miles of my life. As I said before, other times I'm out in the snow and it's almost like heaven. It's some of the best times. Also, there are alternatives to riding out in the cold. You just don't want to do it. You don't want to invest in the snow gear for your bike and all that stuff. There's always the trainer. I do feel that stuff like Zwift and the apps out there now make trainers way more enjoyable to ride. I've had a problem the last couple winters after making a video about how much I was enjoying Zwift and the trainer with connections and trainer issues and stuff like that. To me, it gets to the point where if I'm going to spend as long getting my trainer ready to ride, I'll just go outside no matter what it's like. But that is a viable alternative, especially if you're someone who is really riding to keep in physical shape. The trainer is actually way more effectual than, riding outside if you're worried about speed and fitness and all that kind of stuff. So if it's something you can enjoy, it's a great way to go. I used to just run in the winters. So if I couldn't get on my bike, I would run. I don't run anymore. I prefer to always try and make a go of riding, even if it's short, even if it's a neighborhood loop. I do have some little neighborhood routes that I could take around where I live behind the studio, and that's a way that makes it work for me. And then there's all the other kinds of things like gyms and yoga, and I can't speak to because they're not things that I personally do, but fine alternatives if that's what you're into. So if it's something you think you want to do, my whole thing here was to be honest about it. Like, it is something that I now mostly enjoy. This winter's just been a tough one, but I'm going to link right here to the video I made about riding in the winter. Ted King just put out one. If you follow Dustin Klein, D. Klein online, he puts out some. The Pacific Northwest, again, is very different than here. If you're more roadie oriented or road oriented, GCN has probably about, I think, 10,552 videos about the topic. And then, everywhere else too, from all the articles and stuff like that. I think there's a few key factors. It depends on if you're riding in the snow. It depends on how cold you're willing to go and where you live and if there's any trails around. But that's it for this one. Kind of a stream of conscious, just some of the things I was thinking while I was out riding my bike about the winter. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.